Aloha, welcome to Chappie's Tiki Bar. I'm Chappie and this is Mookie. This is episode number 10 of my Find Joy in Tiki series, where I take the book from Ingrid Fetell, Joyful, and we apply it to Tiki culture. And she has 10 aesthetics of joy. This is the 10th aesthetic, Renewal. So we're going to apply that to Tiki culture. First, a little bit about Tiki culture. And basically, it's tropical escapism, and it's the desire or act to escape to a tropical destination, often sought for its warm weather, beaches, and relaxation. It can either involve a physical trip or a mental shift. And this is done by immersing oneself in tropical flavors, scents, and imagery. This form of escapism offers a break from your daily work routine and a chance to experience a new environment, preferably a tropical one. So tiki bars often feature tropical decor, cocktails, and a feeling of a tropical location. We're going to take a look at two very famous men that actually physically went to tropical locations, and how this ties into the book Joyful is they not only reinvented themselves by going to these tropical locations, but they used it to reinvent their famous works. So we're going to look at Paul Gauguin and Ernest Hemingway. And this is going to tie into Ingrid Fetell's Joyful aesthetic Renewal. And it also very much applies to Tiki culture. First, we're going to look at Paul Gauguin. He's a famous French painter, sculptor, printmaker, and writer. Paul Gauguin is renowned for being a leader in the post-impressionist movement and symbolist movements. He also, on his travels to Tahiti, popularized primitive art. And then, of course, everybody knows about Ernest Hemingway. We're going to get into some very interesting stories about his life. But both men reinvented themselves through their works and going to tropical destinations. So Ingrid Fetell distinguishes between joy and happiness, arguing that happiness is a broader evaluation of how we feel about our lives over time, while joy is a more immediate and intense experience of positive emotion in the moment. Using my two examples, Paul Gauguin and Ernest Hemingway, they went to great lengths to experience joy in tropical locations, but I don't believe either one of them found happiness, particularly later in their lives. So joy is described as an intense, more immediate feeling, while happiness is a more general feeling of well-being. Neither of these men had a general feeling of well-being towards the end of their lives. So again, they both went to tropical locations, and this greatly influenced their works. Ernest Hemingway's travels are a testament to his adventurous spirit and his ability to draw inspiration from diverse environments and cultures. And his works definitely reflected the experiences he had at these places. Hemingway's connection with Spain, particularly the Basque region and Pamplona, influenced his writings in The Sun Also Rises. Hemingway spent a significant amount of time in Cuba, particularly Havana, where he lived for 2 decades. Time in Cuba inspired his masterpiece, Old Man and the Sea. Hemingway also spent a significant portion of his life in Key West, Florida, where he developed his distinctive writing style and built a strong network of relationships. One of his famous quotes is, "Life is short and the world is wide." In the summer of 1933, Hemingway traveled to Africa for a 3-month safari. 3-month safari in Africa offered Hemingway ample time to hunt and enjoy the outdoors. Despite succumbing to a severe illness on the trip, that necessitated a hospital recovery, Hemingway's trophies included a lion and other large game. Traveling through Kenya and Tanzania, Hemingway hunted the plains of the Serengeti, tracked animals through the brush, and recorded his experiences for later use. His first African safari provided Hemingway with material and inspiration for the novel Green Hills of Africa and the short stories The Snows of the Kilimanjaro and The Short Happy Life of Francis. Hemingway returned to Africa 20 years later with his fourth wife. They traveled through the Belgian Congo, Rwanda, and Kenya. Hemingway's persona as a fearless adventurer only was magnified when he survived not one but two plane crashes. The famous writer, then in his mid-50s, had hired a pilot to take him and his wife, Mary Welsh, on a sightseeing tour aboard a small Cessna. I wonder if she enjoyed being called... She was constantly being called his fourth wife. In a lot of articles I read, they don't even use her name, they just call her the fourth wife. Just the fourth wife. But I digress. Anyways, during their flight, the plane clipped a telegraph wire and plunged into the crocodile-infested shores of the Nile. Stranded there, they camped out overnight, rationing their beer and whiskey. In the morning, a tourist boat spotted them and took them to a nearby town. There they boarded a second plane, which had arrived to transport them safely out of Uganda. Just after takeoff, the plane crashed and caught fire. The pilot kicked out the window and pulled Welsh through, but Hemingway's too large to fit through the window frame. Hemingway then proceeded to ram his head against the plane's door and actually forced the door open with his head. This brute force caused him to suffer a concussion and a fractured skull. A passing plane saw the first crash and reported it as no survivors, leading to widespread reports that Hemingway was dead. The news of Ernest Hemingway's death, where he was allegedly killed when his single-engine plane crashes somewhere in Uganda, January 24th, 1954, caused networks to break away from their regular programming, developing otherwise shocking news to the world. However, the famous quote, "Reports of my death have been greatly exaggerated," was written by Mark Twain in response to rumors of his death. Although Hemingway was not associated with this quote, it was used in many newspaper articles to follow. We're going to delve into Ingrid Fetell's 10th Aesthetic of Joy, Renewal, and we're going to get some more stories about Ernest Hemingway. And you thought Ernest Hemingway was badass. I got some stories about Paul Gauguin as well, and how they're related to renewal and tiki culture. So stay tuned for that. Dream of a durable kind of happiness, a state of bliss that once found has a consistency of granite. And while there are many things we can do to create a reservoir of joy that helps us amplify the highs and buffers the lows of everyday life, sometimes we have to accept that joy moves through our lives in an unpredictable way. There will always be aspects of our life that are out of our control. The demands of our bosses and customers, the moods of our partners and families, the ups and downs of the economy, politics, and the weather. Challenges appear from unexpected sources. The things we wish for don't always arrive on the schedule we set for them. Sometimes even when we get what we had hoped for, it doesn't make us as happy as we'd imagined. And in these difficult moments, it's easy to feel a bit lost or stuck, that joy has somehow forgotten us or passed us by. Spring restores our consciousness of time, and even more so of possibility. The thawing of the hard earth, the flowing of sap, the bursting open of millions of buds, and the slow land quickens. We feel the energy of new beginnings around us, and our attention turns to the future. We are reminded of what a thrill it is to know that joy is speeding towards us, and to stand awaiting it with open arms. Finding happiness isn't a matter of creating a perfectly even-keeled experience of the world, where no sadness ever intrudes. Instead, it means riding the waves of joy and trying to find our way back upwards when we've been knocked down. In renewal, we find a kind of resilience and ability to bounce back from difficulty by reigniting the optimism and hope that rises within us when we believe that joy will return. Just like the seasons, cycles create a symmetry between past and future that remind us joy will come back again. Here's Winnie the Pooh's response in the house at Pooh Corner when Christopher Robin asks him about his favorite things to do. "Well," said Pooh, "what I like best," and then he had to stop and think, because although eating honey was a very good thing to do, there was a moment just before you began to eat it which was better than when you were, but he didn't know what it was called. Sensitive Pooh intuits what scientists are now just discovering. Studies have found that a period of anticipation can significantly enhance the joy we find in an experience. Researchers believe that this may be because we create detailed mental simulations of future events, so imagining the future joys fills our mind with rich sensations and exciting possibilities. Similarly, even though Friday is a work day, it is usually considered more joyful than Sunday, which for many people brings on depression known as Sunday blues. On Friday, we have the whole weekend ahead of us, while on Sunday, we're already thinking about the work week ahead. Cycles create regular moments of anticipation that bring future joy into the present, ensuring we always have something to look forward to. This reminds me a lot of my Home Tiki Bar. The Tiki Bar experience can satisfy the desire to escape a tropical destination without leaving your own home. The tropical escape aspect is a key draw, offering a sense of adventure and relaxation that may mimic the feeling of being on vacation or exploring a new culture. Finding a closer relationship to the cycles of Earth is often as simple as reconnecting with nature. Yes, while seasonal pleasures can be particularly intense, they also have a bittersweet undercurrent. When I see the cherry blossoms, I feel joyful and sad at the same time, a young woman named Aya told me, gazing up wistfully at a tree in full flower. Almost as soon as they open, the delicate blossoms begin to shed their petals. While through a Western lens, it seems this might diminish their joy. For the Japanese, it actually heightens it. They have a phrase, mono no aware. It is hard to translate to English, but it loosely means the gentle sadness of things. It's used to describe a pang of pleasure that exists alongside an awareness of its fleeting nature. It brings a strange consciousness that the intensity of joy we feel is in the direct proportion to the loss soon to follow. In the West, we tend to shy away from these fleeting pleasures. Sometimes the most beautiful experience with a flower is brief. Like these garden roses from the field. They are so fragile because they put out all their energy into making this intoxicating scent, which means they don't last for more than 24 hours on your kitchen table. But those 24 hours you have to smell the flower are pretty amazing. Our efforts to prolong our joy sometimes diminish its intensity. I was surprised to discover that the vast majority of cherry trees planted in Tokyo and around Japan are from just one species, the Yoshino Cherry. By choosing to plant the one type of tree, the Japanese have created a landscape of design to burst open in one glorious eclat, to herald the arrival of spring, not with a steady trickle of different blooms, but a single abundant spectacle. And while the beginning comes all at once, so does the end. For our foraging ancestors, flowers offered an important piece of information about the landscape. They gave clues to the future locations of edible fruits and seeds, several weeks or months ahead of time. Flowers were like coming attractions for food, and early humans who were smart enough to notice them would be able to plan their return so as to harvest the ripened fruit before birds and other rivals could devour it. Over time, an appreciation for flowers may have provided enough of a survival advantage that it became an intrinsic human attribute, so universal that indifference to flowers is a common sign of depression. But our delight in flowers bears traces of an anachronistic anticipation, a cue to expect future joy. Organic forms bring fluidity of the living world back into our lives. Obviously, plants and flowers can do this, but so can more abstract forms that incorporate S-curves into their shape. Objects made by bending metal, wood, or wire. Ruffles or scallops add an S-curvy edge to clothing and other textiles. As with flowers, it does take a large dose of these elements to bring a sense of freshness into space. Even subtle accents like a curve on a chair back or the arc of a handle can make the difference between whether something feels inert or alive. Some things you may find in a tiki bar are tropical plants, potted plants, flowers, and even hanging vines used to create a lush tropical environment. Also, luau inspired decorations, elements like colorful lanterns, tiki torches, hand-carved wood masks, and of course, bamboo is often used for framing furniture and decorative elements, adding to the tropical feel. And don't forget about thatched roofs. These are a hallmark of tiki bars, made from materials like palm fronds, reeds, or synthetic alternatives. Frank Lloyd Wright has described it as a curving wave that never breaks, capturing the essence of upsurging energy that lies at the heart of the renewal aesthetic. I never fail to feel joy when I see a little flower poking through a crack in the sidewalk. Though it stands alone in a place where it obviously doesn't belong, it bears no self-consciousness and seems unbothered by the obstacles presented by the site in which it happens to sprout. It does its best to harvest the rays of sunlight, capture the rains, and smile open its petals to the sky. Donn Beach and Vic Bergeron get most of the credit for starting the tiki culture movement. For certain, they didn't invent the idea of escapism to a tropical place. For instance, famous French painter Paul Gauguin in 1891 took a legendary journey to the tropical paradise of the South Pacific. That September in 1891, he arrived on the island of Tahiti in search of a simple life. The exotic location of Tahiti inspired Gauguin to produce a series of paintings. When Gauguin was well into his 30s, he was a wealthy stockbroker at the Paris Stock Exchange. He only started painting as a hobby. However, his works had a massive influence on artists of the 20th century. Gauguin was exposed to travel and the exotic early in life, as he had spent some time in Peru as a child, as his father was exiled due to being a radical journalist. Also, aged 17 to 23, he joined the French Merchant Navy and enjoyed life at sea. In April 1887, he left Europe, first arriving in Panama and the Caribbean island of Martinique, which is a French colony. He lived in a tiny native hut, in his words, living as a savage. While living in Martinique, he began using brighter colors and lighter colors. He really enjoyed the light in Martinique, used a more decorative effect in his works. Gauguin was fascinated with native art. He loved Japanese prints. These same Japanese prints, coincidentally, were the inspiration for Aloha Shirts or Hawaiian shirts in Hawaii. Gauguin also sought inspiration from Primative Masks. His fascination with the primitive masks and culture was not just a case of hiding his love, as it was a conscious exploration and appropriation of their aesthetic and symbolic power. He sought inspiration in the art of non-Western peoples, particularly those of the South Pacific. Gauguin was drawn to the simplicity and directness of primitive art, which he saw as a refreshing contrast to the perceived decadence and artificiality of European art. He drew inspiration from oceanic cultures, particularly those of Tahiti and the Marquesas Islands, incorporating their imagery, symbolism, and designs into his paintings. Gauguin sought to create a synthesis of color, composition, and subject matter, aiming to evoke the inner life of his subjects rather than simply depicting their outward appearance. Gauguin's use of bold outlines, vivid colors, and semi-abstracted forms had a significant impact on the development of modern art, influencing artists like Matisse and Picasso. Pablo Picasso was also deeply influenced by primitive art, particularly African masks and sculptures, from around 1906 to 1919. This influence is most evident in his African period, where he incorporated features from these objects into his own work, particularly in the early works of the Cubist movement. Picasso also experimented with different materials and techniques using his African influences to explore new ways of representing the human form and creating three-dimensional space on a two-dimensional canvas. Picasso was inspired by the power and symbolism of African art, viewing it as a way to express his own artistic vision and explore new ways of representing the world. But back to Paul Gauguin. When he was in Tahiti, he learned to convey an idea through color. Before he made his 10,000-mile journey to the South Pacific, he sold 30 paintings for an impressive sum of 10,000 francs. While in Tahiti, Gauguin painted the simple idea of the exotic. He married a local girl on the island. She was just 13. However, June 1893, sick with syphilis, he headed back to France. In May 1894, during a working visit to Brittany filled with nostalgia, a 45-year-old Paul Gauguin broke his leg above the ankle in a scuffle with sailors in broad daylight. Concarneau, an old fishing port which had become a busy international art colony, Gauguin made an attractive target in his outlandish attire and shoulder-length hair, huddled with young art disciplines, a pet monkey, and a child mistress whose dark skin offended late 19th century social norms as much as her age. The violent incident added to the changed relations Gauguin found for himself in France since his return to his homeland in late August 1893. After his 27-month artistic exile in the middle of the South Pacific started in 1891, a mid-career artist strove to re-establish ties among dealers, critics, collectors, and artists in Paris. In Brittany, Gauguin's injury required him to be hospitalized and put on morphine and alcohol as painkillers for a 2-month recuperation. Gauguin finished in Paris between 1893 and 1895. No works of graphic art by Gauguin in this Paris period are more mysterious than the following. Tahitians fishing involving savage Eves. Tahitian landscape, blood sacrifices. Tahitian idol, the goddess Hina, vying spirits in the natural world. And Oviri, based on Gauguin's ceramic sculpture. Gauguin felt the call of the Pacific in 1895 and sold more of his artwork to raise money to return to Tahiti. An article he wrote to promote the event was revealing in response to critics of the review. Conflict between establishment and civilization, he called himself a barbarian. The idea as Gauguin as a barbarian is an enduring feature of his legend. His final trip to Tahiti marked a severance from civilized society. He left France in 1895, never to return, and before long he found another teenage girlfriend. 1897, his syphilis was serious enough that it affected his ability to work for any period of time, and he may have suffered a series of heart attacks. He had planned to end his own life, but before that he wanted to create a final masterpiece. Where do we come from? The sum of his views of Tahitian culture. December 1897, he chose arsenic as his poison. However, he took too much and his stomach rejected it. So he lived on and continued painting. 1900, his illness prevented him from painting at all. 1903 was his final self-portrait. portrait, and he died in May of that year. He professed to despise society. This 19th century artist paved the way for the next artists of the 20th century. Out of all the 19th century artists, he paved the way for the next generation of artists. BoozhoundBlog.com writes, "You may well ask yourself what the hell Hemingway has to do with tiki culture, that mid-century fad for flaming rum drinks, poo-poo platters, and limbo lines. A fad that is currently making a revival in metropolitan centers across the United States. The connection isn't obvious, at least until you look for it, but even a quick Google search makes it clear that there is some kind of kismic relationship between Hemingway and the fantasy and booze-driven need to escape from modern culture that marked tiki's initial spread and its current popularity. Allow me to offer some examples. In celebration of Hemingway's birthday, the Llyod Tiki Bar in Houston has been known to transform itself into a Havana-themed bar. Then there is Hemingway's Lounge on Hollywood Boulevard, an African-themed tiki bar. There are literally hundreds of tiki bars, blogs, and even podcasts that feature Hemingway-themed drinks, from the Papa Double Daiquiri to the Hemingway Hated Hawaii to Lucky Joe's Kitten Mittens. Tiki culture was a popular fascination with the primitive, which relied upon certain themes: naturalism, primitivism, and visuality. That had fascinated Hemingway in the 1920s and surfaced in his writing on hunting, travel, and bullfighting. Understood in this genealogy is the idea that the mid-century marked a time of modernism embodied in Hemingway himself, became a popular way for American public to navigate the traumas of modern life, specifically the traumas of technology, such as Cold War, nuclear threat, commercialism, commodification of society and gender, corporatism of American life, and social conformity. The back-to-nature attitude is manifest in Hemingway's early short stories, most famously Big Two-Hearted River, where Nick Adams escapes the traumatizing effects of industrialized warfare by losing himself in the wilderness. This return to nature and its potential to heal the modern condition was a theme that fascinated Hemingway throughout his life and work. He returned to it again late in life in the Nick Adams novel he started and abandoned, a part of which was published as The Last Good Country, where a young Nick and his sister live in the wild in order to escape federal game wardens, who are indeed civil regulators of nature. Adams, after all, references Adam, the first man cast into the wilderness, separated from Eden. In a late interview for the Paris Review, Hemingway listed Gauguin as one of his influential literary forebears, and he often cited Cézanne as a central influence. It is commonplace to discuss post-impressionism or cubism and Hemingway, especially in regard to how his seemingly simplistic style evokes impressions of larger themes. But this short history also makes clear that we can embed his work in larger modernist fascination with primitive art as well. Indeed, Hemingway often described trying to find linguistic equivalents to a purity of form, how the simplicity of description, or how taking emotionally charged events down their basic elements produced a much more powerful effect. Another dimension of depth. This is exactly what primitive art inspired in Cubism. Simplistic forms taken down their basic elements. The tension between simplicity and depth is forced upon the reader not only through repetition but via contrast, as when Cubist art is positioned against oceanic sculpture in Man Ray's portrait of Kiki, which forces us to consider his model in terms of abstract due to the forced dialogue, both similarities and differences between them. Short stories such as Snows of Kilimanjaro force the same counterpoint between the modern subject and the primitive. We are forced to reconsider the importance of our own values and lives through the slow death brought about by the primitive conditions of Kilimanjaro. Hemingway often uses both primitive settings and simplicity of form in order to better understand the modern situation. His characters and narrative, much as Picasso relied on African masks as cubist elements to comment upon our own fractured identities or the limits of traditional artistic styles. The beauty of Renewal is that it has its own momentum, propelled by the relentless ambition of life to endure and propagate. Life multiplies, and so does joy. The infectious quality of joy makes its dispersion as efficient as the most prolific weed. To fix the world is a tall order, but to renew it is not nearly so daunting. The lesson of renewal is that from small seeds, big things grow. From the seeds of our own joy, a whole world can be reborn. And that concludes my 10-episode series on Find Joy in Tiki, where I take Ingrid Fetell's 10 aesthetics of joy and apply it to Tiki culture. I'll just do a quick recap. This episode we did number 10, Renewal. So I'll just do a quick recap on the first 9. So number 1 was energy. And I touched on the energy from music, and we learned about Caribbean steel drums, the origins of how it went from Africa to Trinidad, and also Hawaiian music. Also, we covered color as energy, and of course, these wonderful Hawaiian shirts are a big part of Tiki culture. So the second aesthetic of joy in the book Joyful is abundance. Victor Bergeron had a famous quote, lots of decoration causes lots of conversation, and lots of conversation sells drinks. So that pretty much sums up abundance in Tiki culture. In the book, she explains why our brain likes abundance. It's a survival mechanism. When we see fruit on trees or anything abundant or lush, our brain tells us we like it because that's how cavemen decided where to live. So for abundance, we took a really good look at one of the founders of tiki bars and tiki culture, Vic Bergeron. And we also looked at a very famous tiki bar in Las Vegas, Aku Aku, which was at the old Stardust Casino. And when they imploded the Stardust, they moved the giant Easter Island statues to Sunset Park in Las Vegas. And you can still see those wonderful tiki statues that Ingrid Fetell quotes Mae West in her famous quote, "Too much of a good thing can be wonderful." The third aesthetic of joy is freedom. I spoke about my time where I worked on the cruise ships. I took Jimmy Buffett's advice, changes in attitude, changes in latitude, and I got a job working in the Caribbean on the cruise ships. And I have some rare footage of a younger chappie partying on the cruise ships. Ingrid Fetell also, in the chapter of freedom, talks about nature. And I applied that to some of Martin Denny's work in exotica music, which is related to tiki culture. There's a lot of bird calls, especially in his song Quiet Village. The fourth aesthetic of joy is harmony. I applied harmony to my tiki mug collection and how you can organize it in size, shape, color, places. And in this chapter, Ingrid Fetell also talks about feng shui and how the energy of qi flows through a room. And I had a couple examples of tiki bars that displayed this. The fifth aesthetic of joy is play. She really emphasizes on round shapes. Of course, you play with balls and other things, but the reason why people like round shapes is, again, it's like a survival mechanism in your brain. You see a round shape, that's safe. If you see a square shape or a rectangle, the corners are sharp and it could imply danger. So your brain's subconsciously telling you you like round shapes. And then I applied the circular motions to different things in Hawaiian culture, like the hula dance and the lei. And also something called the breath of life. And I also spoke about Walt Disney's relation to tiki culture and how he used this aesthetic in his cartoon characters, but he also had a lot of inspiration for the tiki movement. The sixth aesthetic of joy is surprise. And then I applied this to the connection between tiki culture and the pirate theme, where they find treasure, and what a wonderful surprise that would be to find a chest full of gold coins. And then I spoke of some tiki bars, and I gave dish commonly served in poo-poo platters in tiki bars, which is crab rangoon, which is like a fried wonton dumpling, but you get the surprise of crab and cream cheese in your crab rangoon. And Ingrid Fetell gave the example of flamingos as like a unexpected welcome surprise, because they're out of the ordinary, but you can still recognize them as a bird. And she says small surprises can reset your joy meter. And number 7, transcendence. And Ingrid Fetell talks about the upward movements and joy. And then because she's a designer, she talks a lot about space and high ceilings. And I gave an example of some tiki bars and restaurants that one in particular had a sky ceiling. There was a Swiss Family Robinson that lived in the treehouse that was elevated in the forest, and Disney actually had a attraction, the Disney attraction Swiss Family Treehouse. And then number 8 is magic. And then I had to talk about the Mermaids and the bar. One of my most favorite bars is the Sip and Dip, where they have a mermaid tank with live mermaids swimming behind the bar. And then I spoke about how tiki culture, magic, and popular culture intermingle. I went into great length about the story of the Brady Bunch when they went to Hawaii and Bobby found a tiki idol at a construction site, and also a particular episode of Gilligan's Island where a magic or a magician's trunk washed up on the island. And then that episode was the one where Gilligan got his feelings hurt and he went to live in a cave as the lone wolf. And then number 9 is celebration. Ingrid Fetell gives numerous examples of how animals also have a way of celebrating. The wolves, chimpanzees, even elephants. And then along the lines of celebration, I gave some excellent ideas for tiki themed parties or tropical themed parties. And also I went into a long description about the history of the punch bowl and how it brings people together in celebration. And also there's a long tradition of punch bowls and communal drinks like the scorpion bowl in tiki culture. All right, so that concludes this if you've been with me this long, then thank you so much. Thank you for watching this entire episode. I know it was very long. Also, if you watched the first 9 episodes, thank you so much. And if you like this programming, I also have a second channel, and I might as well bring it up because if you've been with me this long, you might be interested in my second channel. It's called Tiki Pizza, where I combine my love of tiki culture and pizza. So I got pizza making, pizza reviews, and I try to mix in some tiki drinks or a little bit of tiki flair into my pizza videos. So thanks again, and if you haven't, subscribe and give us a like, and if you want to leave me a comment, I'll surely answer it. And if you have any questions, I can answer that as well. So this is Chappie saying, life is hard. That's just the way it goes, but sometimes it goes the other way. See you next time on Chappie's Tiki Bar.